I was sending my $1,150 like every month when the letter slipped out of his mail. Mortgage balance, $312,000. I froze. Wait, what? He always said we rented. The horrifying reality was, I didn't mean to open anything. I wasn't snooping. I just saw the envelope on the counter with his name on it, and it looked official. Not bills, not junk. Something from a bank. The kind of envelope that makes you pause for a second. I told myself I'd just check if it was urgent. That's what I tell myself now too. I slid the paper out halfway, just enough to see the header. And that's when I saw the word mortgage. At first, I actually smiled. Like a small, confused laugh under my breath. Wrong address, right? Except it wasn't. The address printed there was ours. Same building. Same unit number. No mistake. I felt something drop in my stomach, slow and heavy, like my body understood it before my brain caught up. I pulled the paper out the rest of the way. Ethan Caldwell. Only his name. Mortgage balance, $312,000. Monthly payment, around $1,800. I stood there in the kitchen, just staring at it, reading the same lines over and over like they might change if I gave them enough time. We don't own anything. That was always the understanding. We rent. We split rent. We keep things simple. That's what he said from the beginning. 50-50 keeps it clean, he told me once, early on. No one owes anyone anything. And I agreed. I liked that about us. It felt fair. Stable. No weird power imbalance, no silent resentment building in the background. So every month, same routine. I'd transfer my half. $1,150. Same amount, same date. No reminders needed. It just became automatic. And I never questioned it. Not once. I remember one time, maybe a year into living together, I joked while we were eating takeout on the couch. We're basically funding someone else's life with this rent, I said. He didn't even look up from his laptop. Yeah, he said, calm like always. But at least it's predictable. Predictable. That word hits different now. I looked around the apartment then, standing in that same kitchen, the letter still in my hand. Same cabinets, same counter, same stupid coffee mug he always left too close to the edge. Nothing looked different. And somehow that made it worse. Because if this was real, then nothing about this place meant what I thought it did. I put the paper back on the counter, then picked it up again. I couldn't stop reading it like I was trying to catch it in a lie. But everything lined up. Dates. Amounts. Bank details. His name, clear as day. No mention of mine anywhere. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Something I wasn't seeing yet. Maybe he co-signed for someone. Maybe it was tied to the building somehow. Maybe. I stopped. Because none of that explained why the address was exactly ours. I felt this weird pressure building in my chest, like I needed to move, to do something, but I didn't know what. So I did the one thing I hadn't done in 3 years. I looked. Not like tearing the place apart or anything dramatic. Just checking. Quietly. There was a drawer in the living room console where he kept what he called his system. Important documents, warranties, anything he didn't want getting lost. He always told me not to mess with it because it would ruin the order. I stood in front of it for a second. Then I opened it. Everything inside was neat. Labeled folders, stacked cleanly, exactly how I'd expect from him. I pulled one out at random. Property tax notice. I blinked. Read it again. Same address. Same unit. His name. I felt my fingers tighten around the paper. I grabbed another folder. Insurance. Then another. Purchase agreement. I don't even remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the floor, paper spread out around me, my back against the couch like my legs just stopped working. Because there it was. All of it. He didn't just know something about this place. He owned it. This wasn't some misunderstanding. It wasn't a paperwork error or a weird technical thing I didn't get. He bought this place. And for almost 3 years, he let me believe we were renting it together. I tried to think back, to find the moment where this should have clicked, where I missed something obvious. But there wasn't one. He never lied directly. Not in a way I could point to. He just never said anything. And I never asked. Because why would I? Who hides something like that? I looked at the numbers again, trying to line them up in my head. Mortgage, around $1,800. What we paid together, about $2,300. My share, $1,150. Every month. For almost 3 years. A slow, sick realization started to settle in. I wasn't splitting rent. I was paying into his property. His investment. And I didn't even know it. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the papers, trying to figure out what I was supposed to feel first. Angry. Embarrassed. Used. All of it maybe. But more than anything I felt stupid. Because I trusted him. Not in some blind, naive way. I just believed what we had made sense. That we were equals. That we were building something together, even if it was just day by day, bill by bill. And now I didn't know what we were. I heard his keys at the door later that evening, and my first instinct was to shove everything back where it belonged and pretend none of this happened. So I did. I put every paper back exactly how I found it. Closed the drawer. Cleared the counter. Even threw out the envelope like it never existed. By the time he walked in, I was standing in the kitchen like any normal night. "Hey," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "Hey," I said back, and my voice sounded almost steady. Almost. He walked past me, kissed my cheek like always, like nothing in the world had shifted. "How was your day?" "Fine," I said. And that was it. I made dinner. We ate. He talked about work, some client issue that didn't really matter. I nodded at the right moments, asked a question here and there, played my part. But the whole time, my brain wouldn't stop. Every sentence he said felt off now. Every normal thing felt staged, like I was watching something instead of living it. At one point, he opened his laptop at the table, and I saw the spreadsheet again. Rows and rows of numbers. Our expenses. Split down the middle. Clean. Fair. Equal. I almost laughed. Instead, I just said, "Hey, random question." He glanced up. "Yeah." I kept my tone light. Casual. "Do you know anything about a mortgage tied to this place?" And for the first time since I'd known him, Ethan paused. It was small. Anyone else might not have noticed it. But I did. And in that second, before he said anything, I already knew. Something wasn't right. He paused. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden movement, no obvious panic. Just a slight delay. A fraction of a second longer than normal before he answered. "What?" he said, almost too casually. "No. Why would I?" I held his gaze for a second. Just long enough to feel that shift again. That quiet, uncomfortable certainty settling deeper. I could have dropped it right there. Pretended I misread something. Let him move on, let the night stay normal. But I didn't. "I saw a letter earlier," I said. "From a bank. It mentioned a mortgage. With this address." He didn't answer right away this time. He leaned back in his chair, arms folding slowly like he was buying himself time. Then he let out a small breath through his nose. "You opened my mail?" There it was. Not denial. Not confusion. Deflection. "I didn't go through your stuff," I said. "It was on the counter. I thought it might be important." "That's still my mail," he said, sharper now. "You don't just open it." I nodded once, like I was acknowledging the point. Like we were having a normal disagreement. But my chest was tight. "You own this place," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I just said it. And he didn't deny it. He just looked at me for a second, then sighed like I'd asked him something inconvenient. "It's not a big deal," he said. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Not a big deal. "You bought this place?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Yeah," he said. Before we got serious. "It's just an investment." An investment. I felt my hands start to shake, so I gripped the edge of the table to steady them. "And you didn't think to tell me?" I said. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "It didn't really matter," he said. "We still split costs. Same outcome. Same outcome." I let out a small laugh, but it didn't sound like me. "Same outcome." I repeated. "Ethan, I've been paying you over $1,000 a month thinking we were renting. And you were living here," he said, like that settled it. "It's still 50-50. You use the space, you pay your share." My head felt like it was buzzing. "That's not the same thing," I said. "You're building equity." What? "Covering your mortgage." "It's not like that," he said quickly. "You're overthinking it." Overthinking it. I stared at him, trying to understand how he could say that with a straight face. "Then explain it to me," I said. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that." He rubbed his forehead, already irritated. "Look," he said, "I bought the place before you moved in. I took all the risk. Down payment, loan, everything. You moved in later. We agreed to split living expenses. That's all this is." "No," I said quietly. "That's not all this is. Because you let me believe we were renting from someone else." "I never said that," he snapped. I froze for a second. He wasn't yelling, but his tone had shifted just enough. "I never said we had a landlord," he continued. "You assumed that." I felt something drop in my stomach again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was anger. "You're serious?" I said. "You're going with that?" "That I just made that up in my head." "I didn't correct you," he said. "There's a difference." That sentence stayed in the air between us. Cold. Calculated. I leaned back in my chair slowly, just staring at him. "You let me believe something that benefited you," I said. "For 3 years. It wasn't about benefiting me," he said. "It was about keeping things simple." Simple. For who? I asked. He didn't answer right away. And that silence told me more than anything he could have said. I pushed my chair back and stood up, needing space, needing to breathe. He watched me, but he didn't move. "I asked you once," I said, pacing a little, trying to keep my voice steady. "Remember? About the rent going up?" I said. "I guess the landlord raised it again." And you just nodded. He looked away for a second. That didn't seem like a big moment, he said. It was to me, I said. Because I trusted you. He exhaled sharply. You're making this way bigger than it needs to be. That did it. I stopped pacing and turned to him. Bigger than it needs to be? I repeated. Ethan, I've given you over $40,000 thinking we were splitting rent. That's not small. You were paying for a place to live, he said. Like anyone else would. Not like this, I said. Not while being kept in the dark. He stood up then, finally, like he was getting tired of the conversation. I didn't keep you in the dark, he said. I just didn't see a reason to complicate things. It worked, didn't it? I stared at him. Worked. That's what you think this was? I asked. Something that worked? He didn't respond. He just looked at me like I was being unreasonable. Like I was the one creating a problem out of nothing. And that's when something shifted in me for real. Because up until that moment, a part of me was still hoping there was some version of this that made sense. Some explanation that would make it less intentional. But there wasn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he was completely fine with it. I sat back down slowly, the energy just draining out of me. Did you ever plan to tell me? I asked. My voice was quieter now. Not angry. Just tired. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. I don't know, he said. Maybe. If it came up. If it came up. I nodded once, even though my throat felt tight. Right, I said. The room went quiet after that. No yelling. No dramatic scene. Just silence. He went back to his laptop like the conversation was over. Like we just disagreed about something small. I sat there, staring at the table, trying to process how everything could feel so different in the same space. Same apartment. Same furniture. Same person sitting across from me. But nothing felt the same anymore. Every memory started to replay differently in my head. Every fair conversation about money. Every time he reassured me we were doing things the right way. It all felt tilted now. Like I'd been standing on something uneven and just didn't realize it until I looked down. After a while, I stood up without saying anything and went to the bedroom. I closed the door behind me and just sat on the edge of the bed. No tears. Not yet. Just this heavy, sinking feeling that I couldn't shake. Because it wasn't just about the money. It was about the way he looked at me while saying it didn't matter. Like my understanding of our life together was optional. Like the truth was something he could choose to share, or not. And I had no say in it. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, the same way I had 100 times before. Except this time, all I could think was one thing. I don't know who I'm living with. I didn't sleep that night. Not even close. I kept my eyes closed for hours, hoping my brain would just shut off, but it didn't. It kept replaying everything. Every conversation about money. Every we're doing this the fair way. Every time I trusted him without questioning it. At some point around 3 in the morning, I sat up and checked my bank app. I don't even know why. I already knew what I'd find. Transfer after transfer. Same amount. Same date. Month after month. $1,150. I started scrolling back further. 1 year. 2 years. Almost 3. The numbers started to blur together, but I forced myself to keep going. Because I needed to see it. Needed to feel it. By the time I added it up, I had to stop and just sit there for a second. A little over $40,000. $40,000. I whispered it out loud like saying it might make it less real. It didn't. I leaned back against the headboard, phone still in my hand, and just stared at the ceiling again. $40,000 into something that was never mine. And the worst part? I would have made different choices if I knew. That's what kept hitting me over and over. I would have picked a cheaper place. I would have negotiated differently. I would have at least had a conversation about what that money actually meant. But he took that choice away from me. Quietly. The next morning, everything felt normal on the surface. He got up, made coffee, moved around the kitchen like any other day. No tension in his voice, no awkwardness in the way he spoke. Do you want eggs? He asked, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a second, watching him. Like I was trying to see something new in him. No, I said. I'm good. He nodded and kept cooking. That was it. No follow-up. No attempt to revisit what we talked about. No apology. Just back to routine. And that told me everything I needed to know. At work, I couldn't focus on anything. Emails piled up, messages came in, deadlines ticked closer, but none of it stuck. My brain kept drifting back to the same place. Numbers. 40,000. 50-50. Simple. At one point, my coworker Lauren leaned over the divider between our desks. You okay? She asked. You've been staring at that screen for like 10 minutes. I blinked, forcing myself back into the moment. Yeah, I said. Just tired. She gave me a look like she didn't fully believe me, but she didn't push it. Same, she said. This week's dragging. I nodded, but I barely heard her. Because in my head, something had already shifted. This wasn't just a bad conversation anymore. This was a problem. And I needed to figure out what I was going to do about it. That night, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I texted Megan. Are you free? She replied almost immediately. Yeah. Coffee? I met her at Maple and Ash, this small place we'd gone to 100 times before. Same corner table, same overly strong espresso, same background noise of people talking over each other. Except this time, I couldn't pretend everything was fine. She took one look at me and frowned. What happened? She said, setting her cup down. I didn't ease into it. I found out Ethan owns the apartment, I said. She blinked. What? He owns it, I repeated. The place we live in. It's his. She stared at me like she was waiting for the punchline. And, she said slowly. And I've been paying him rent, I said. For almost 3 years. Thinking we were renting from someone else. Her expression changed instantly. What do you mean thinking? She asked. Didn't you know? No, I said. He never told me. Megan leaned back in her chair, processing. Wait, she said. So your money's been going, where? His mortgage, I said. Basically. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're kidding. I wish I was. She ran a hand through her hair, shaking her head. Okay, no. She stopped, searching for the right word. That's messed up. I don't know, I said quietly. He says it's still fair. That I lived there, so I paid my share. Megan looked at me like I'd just said something ridiculous. Natalie, she said, leaning forward, there's a difference between paying rent to a landlord and paying your boyfriend's mortgage without knowing. I know, I said. I don't know what to call it. Call it what it is, she said. He used you. The word hit harder than I expected. Used. I looked down at my cup, tracing the rim with my finger. He says I assumed, I said. That he never actually lied. Megan let out another laugh, sharper this time. Oh, that's convenient, she said. So as long as he doesn't technically say it, he's in the clear? I didn't answer. Because part of me hated how true that sounded. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. That's why I wanted to talk to you. She studied me for a second. Do you want to stay with him? She asked. The question felt heavier than everything else. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I don't know, I said. And that scared me more than anything. Because a few days ago, that answer would have been easy. Now it wasn't. Megan nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Then forget him for a second. Think about you. I looked up at her. What do you want? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I hadn't even let myself think that far yet. All I'd been doing was reacting. Trying to process. Trying to understand. I want to not feel like an idiot, I said finally. She softened a little at that. You're not an idiot, she said. I feel like one, I said. I feel like I should have seen it. Asked more questions. Paid attention. You trusted him, she said. That's not the same thing. I let that sit for a second. But trust doesn't fix this, I said. No, she agreed. It doesn't. We sat there in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe filling in the space between us. Then she said, you should talk to a lawyer. I looked up at her. A lawyer? I repeated. Yeah, she said. At least find out where you stand. Because right now, you're just guessing. I thought about that. About the number in my bank app. About the way Ethan said it didn't matter. About how calm he was, like none of this would actually affect anything. And something in me tightened. Yeah, I said slowly. Maybe I should. Megan nodded. At the very least, she said, you'll know if you have options. Options. That word stuck with me the whole way home. Because for the first time since I found that letter, it felt like maybe I wasn't completely stuck in this. Maybe I didn't just have to accept it. When I walked back into the apartment that night, Ethan was on the couch, laptop open again, that same spreadsheet on the screen. He glanced up when I came in. Hey, he said. You were out late. Yeah, I said, setting my bag down. Met Megan. He nodded, like that explained everything. Good, he said. You seem stressed. I almost laughed. Instead, I just said, yeah, I was. He looked back at his screen. And for a second, I just stood there, watching him. Watching how normal he looked. How comfortable. Like nothing in his world had changed. And that's when I realized something. If I didn't do something about this, nothing would. He wasn't going to fix it. He wasn't going to admit it was wrong. He wasn't even going to bring it up again. Because to him, this was already settled. And I was the only one still standing in it. I walked past him without saying anything and went to the bedroom. Closed the door. Sat on the edge of the bed. And for the first time since all of this started, I stopped thinking about what he did. And started thinking about what I was going to do next. The next few days, I didn't bring it up again. Neither did he. And that silence started to say more than the argument ever did. We moved around each other like everything was normal. Same routines. Same small talk. Same shared space. But it felt staged. Like we were both pretending not to notice the thing sitting right in the middle of the room. Except I wasn't pretending anymore. I was paying attention. That weekend, while he was out running errands, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my bank app pulled up again. I started organizing everything, month by month, transfer by transfer. I created a spreadsheet. Not his kind. Mine. Dates. Amounts. Notes. $1,150. $1,150. $1,150. Over and over. I went back as far as the app would let me, then cross-checked with old email confirmations just to fill in the gaps. It took hours. By the end of it, I had a clean total sitting at the bottom of the page. $41,400. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I needed to feel it without looking away. $41,400. Into something that had nothing to do with me. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. Then I opened them and added one more column. Context. Because the money alone wasn't the whole story. So I started writing things I remembered. Agreed to split rent equally. Discussion about landlord raising price. Statement. 50-50 keeps things fair. Little things. But they mattered. Because they showed the pattern. Not just what I paid, but what I believed while paying it. When Ethan got home later that afternoon, I had already closed everything. Laptop shut. Notes saved. Face neutral. He walked in like always, keys dropping into the bowl by the door. Hey, he said. Hey, I replied. He looked at me for a second, like he was trying to read something. You okay? He asked. I'm fine, I said. And I meant it. Not fine like everything was good. Fine like I was done reacting. That seemed to satisfy him. All right, he said, heading toward the kitchen. I grabbed groceries. Thanks, I said. We moved through the evening like nothing had shifted. But internally, everything had. Because I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't trying to understand his side. I understood it. He didn't think he did anything wrong. That was clear. So now I needed to figure out what I was going to do with that. On Monday, I took a longer lunch than usual and drove out to Cherry Creek. I'd already looked up a few attorneys over the weekend. Nothing dramatic. Just quiet research. Reviews. Specialties. Anything that mentioned property or disputes. Daniel Reeves kept coming up. So I booked a consultation. His office was smaller than I expected. Clean, simple, nothing flashy. Just a desk, a couple of chairs, and a wall of frame certifications that all looked the same after a while. He shook my hand, introduced himself, and sat down across from me. So, he said, what can I help you with? I hesitated for a second. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because saying it out loud made it real in a different way. My boyfriend owns the place we live in, I said. And I've been paying him what I thought was rent for almost 3 years without knowing. He didn't react immediately. Just nodded once. Okay, he said. Walk me through it. So I did. Everything. The 50-50 setup. The transfers. The letter. The conversation. I kept it simple. No dramatics. Just facts. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. Do you have records of the payments? He asked. Yes, I said. Every transfer. Good, he said. That helps. I waited for him to say something definitive. Something like, you have a case, or this is straightforward. But he didn't. Instead, he said, this falls into a gray area. Of course it did. What does that mean? I asked. It means it's not clearly illegal, he said. But it's not clean either. It depends on how it's framed. I felt my stomach tighten a little. So I don't have anything? I said. I didn't say that, he replied. You might have an argument for misrepresentation. Possibly unjust enrichment. Possibly, I repeated. He nodded. The key question is whether you were led to believe something that directly affected your financial decisions, he said. And whether that belief was reasonable. I thought about that. About every conversation. Every assumption. I believed we were renting, I said. From someone else. And did he ever explicitly say that? He asked. I hesitated. No, I admitted. But he didn't correct it either. He nodded slowly. That's where the gray area comes in, he said. Omission versus direct misrepresentation. I let out a quiet breath. So what happens? I asked. If you pursue it, it could go a few ways, he said. Negotiation. Settlement. Or nothing if it doesn't hold up. Nothing. That word sat heavy. But, he added, sometimes just presenting the situation clearly is enough to open a conversation. A conversation. Not a win. Not justice. Just a shift. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. We talked a little more. About options. About documentation. About what next steps would look like if I chose to take them. Nothing was guaranteed. And weirdly, that made it feel more real. When I left his office, the air felt colder than I expected. I sat in my car for a minute, hands resting on the steering wheel, just thinking. I wasn't walking away with a clear answer. But I wasn't walking away empty either. I had something now. Information. Perspective. And a choice. That night, when I got home, Ethan was in the living room again. Same spot. Same laptop. Same spreadsheet. I stood there for a second, looking at him. At how comfortable he looked. At how normal everything still was, for him. Hey, he said, glancing up. How was work? Fine, I said. I walked past him, set my bag down, then came back and stood across from the table. He noticed the difference in my posture this time. Everything okay? He asked. I nodded once. Yeah, I said. I just wanted to show you something. I pulled out my phone and opened the spreadsheet I made. Turned it toward him. Rows and rows of numbers. Dates. Transfers. Totals. His eyes moved across the screen. What is this? He asked. I met his gaze. It's everything I've paid you, I said. Since I moved in. He looked back down at the screen, then up at me again. And, he said. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't argue. I just said it. I spoke to a lawyer. And for the first time since all of this started, Ethan didn't look calm. He didn't say anything right away. That was new. Ethan had always had something to say. A response, an explanation, a way to smooth things out or shut them down. But this time, he just stared at the screen, then at me, like he was recalculating something in his head. What did the lawyer say? He asked finally. His voice was steady, but it wasn't as relaxed as before. That it's not simple, I said. But it's also not nothing. He leaned back slowly, crossing his arms. Not nothing, he repeated. Misrepresentation, I said. Unjust enrichment. Those were the words. He let out a quiet breath through his nose. Right, he said. So you're suing me now? I didn't say that. But that's where this is going, isn't it? He said. You talk to a lawyer, you make a spreadsheet. What am I supposed to think? I held his gaze. You're supposed to understand why this matters, I said. I understand that you're upset, he said. I just don't think you're being reasonable. There it was again. Reasonable. I nodded slowly. $41,000, I said. That's what I paid. You paid for a place to live, he said immediately. You keep saying that like it explains everything, I replied. It doesn't. It does, he said, sharper now. You lived here. You used the space. You agreed to split costs. That's what happened. That's not all that happened, I said. You let me believe something that wasn't true. I didn't lie, he said. You didn't tell the truth, I said. The room went quiet again. He looked away first this time. That's not the same thing, he muttered. It is when it benefits you, I said. He didn't respond to that. He just stared at the table for a second, then ran a hand over his face, like he was tired of the conversation. So, what do you want? He asked. The question landed heavier than I expected. Because up until now, I'd been focused on what he did. Not what I wanted. I want this to be acknowledged, I said. For what it is. And what is it? He asked. I didn't hesitate. It's not equal, I said. It never was. He let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. You're acting like I scammed you, he said. I'm acting like I didn't have all the information, I replied. And you knew that? He shook his head. You're twisting it, he said. If I told you from the start that I owned it, you still would have paid to live somewhere. Maybe, I said. But I would have had a choice. That's the difference. He didn't argue that point. He just looked at me, and for the first time, there was something under the surface. Not guilt. Not exactly. But something closer to discomfort. What are you asking for? He said. There it was. Straight to it. I took a breath. I'm asking for part of what I paid, I said. Not all of it. I know I lived here. But something that reflects what actually happened. His expression tightened. How much? He asked. I don't know yet, I said. That's something we'd have to figure out. He laughed again, this time more openly. You're serious, he said. I am. He stood up and started pacing a little, like he needed to burn off the tension. This is insane, he said. You want me to pay you back for living here? I want you to acknowledge that this wasn't what I agreed to, I said. And adjust accordingly. Adjust accordingly, he repeated. You sound like a contract. Maybe I have to, I said. He stopped pacing and looked at me again. So what, if I don't agree, you take me to court? He asked. I didn't answer right away. And that silence was enough. He let out a frustrated breath. You really went there, he said. I went as someone who could explain my options, I replied. Because you didn't. He stared at me for a second, then looked away. This is unbelievable, he muttered. Is it? I asked. Or is it just inconvenient? That hit something. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might argue again. But he didn't. Instead, he just shook his head. I need time to think, he said. Okay, I replied. And that was it. No resolution. No agreement. Just space. The next few days felt different again. Not tense like before. Not silent in the same way. Just distant. He spent more time out. Later nights. Longer hours at work. When we were in the same room, conversations stayed surface level. Logistics. Schedules. Nothing real. And honestly, I didn't push. Because something in me had already moved past needing him to understand. I wasn't waiting for him to fix it anymore. I was preparing to move on from it. That weekend, I started looking at apartments. Not anything fancy. Just something smaller, more manageable. Something that was actually mine, even if it wasn't permanent. I found a studio in Capitol Hill. Nothing special. But clean. Affordable. Mine. I signed the lease 2 days later. I didn't tell him right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted it to be done before it became another discussion. When I finally did tell him, it was simple. I'm moving out next week, I said. He looked at me, surprised but not shocked. Okay, he said after a second. That was it. No argument. No attempt to stop me. And somehow, that hurt more than if he had. The night before I left, I packed most of my things into boxes stacked near the door. The apartment looked different already. Less like a shared space. More like something I was stepping out of. He was in the living room, watching something on his laptop, barely paying attention. I walked over and set an envelope on the table in front of him. He glanced at it. What's this? He asked. A breakdown, I said. Everything I paid. Dates, totals, context. He didn't open it right away. Okay, he said. I stood there for a second, then added, my lawyer's contact is in there too. That got his attention. He looked up at me. You're really doing this, he said. I'm not walking away quietly, I replied. He held my gaze for a moment, then looked back down at the envelope. Right, he said. No anger. No apology. Just acceptance. I picked up my keys, took one last look around the apartment, and walked out. No dramatic moment. No final words. Just the sound of the door closing behind me. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt clear. Not better. Not resolved. But clear. The first few days after I moved out felt quieter than I expected. Not peaceful. Not relieved. Just quiet. Like everything in my life had been turned down a few levels, and I was still getting used to the absence of noise. The studio in Capitol Hill was smaller than I was used to. One main space, a tiny kitchen, windows that didn't quite block out the streetlights at night. But it was mine. Every corner of it. No shared drawers. No spreadsheets on the table. No conversations that felt like negotiations disguised as fairness. Just space. I didn't hear from Ethan right away. Not the next day. Not the day after that. And part of me expected that. It fit the pattern. Avoid, delay, minimize. But then, about a week later, I got an email. Not a text. Not a call. An email. Subject line, regarding your document. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. It was short. Predictable. He said he reviewed the breakdown. That he disagreed with my interpretation of the situation. That from his perspective, the arrangement had always been fair. But then there was a second paragraph. He said he was open to resolving things without escalation. I read that line 3 times. Without escalation. That was the closest thing to acknowledgement I was going to get. I forwarded the email to Daniel. We went back and forth for a couple of weeks after that. Not dramatic. No courtroom scenes. No big confrontations. Just emails. Language getting more careful. Numbers being discussed without ever saying what they really meant. At one point, Daniel called me. They're willing to settle, he said. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear. For how much? I asked. He gave me the number. It wasn't half. It wasn't even close. But it wasn't nothing either. I closed my eyes for a second, letting it settle. If I take it, I said, that's it, right? That's it, he said. You sign, it ends here. No further claims. I looked around my apartment. At the boxes I still hadn't fully unpacked. At the life I was slowly rebuilding piece by piece. Okay, I said. I'll take it. The money came through about a week later. One transfer. Clean. Final. No message attached. No apology. Just a number in my account that didn't feel like a win, but didn't feel like a loss either. Something in between. After that, everything went quiet again. No more emails. No follow-ups. No attempts to check in. He disappeared from my life the same way he handled everything else. Neatly. Predictably. And for a while, I kept expecting something else to happen. Some kind of emotional release. Anger. Closure. Something. But it didn't come like that. Instead, it showed up in small moments. Like the first time I paid rent in my new place and knew exactly where it was going. Or the first time I bought something without mentally checking if it would throw off the balance. Or the first time I realized I wasn't second-guessing every financial decision I made. That's when it started to feel real. Not what he did. But what I wasn't carrying anymore. I still think about it sometimes. Not him exactly. Just the situation. The way something can feel fair on the surface while being completely one-sided underneath. The way someone can avoid lying and still not tell the truth. And the part that stays with me the most? I still don't know if I would have stayed if he had just told me from the beginning. Maybe I would have. Maybe I would have said, okay, that makes sense, and agreed to pay anyway. But I would have known. And that would have made it a choice. Instead, it was something that happened around me without me realizing it. And I think that's the part one can't fully let go of. The money mattered. But the choice mattered more. So now I'm here, in a place that's smaller, quieter, and completely mine. No hidden details. No missing information. Just what it is. And I keep going back to the same question over and over. If someone never technically lies to you, but still lets you believe something that benefits them for years, is that still betrayal?